We're going to be talking about installation of Hand to Note, but in particular, we're going to be talking about modular installation. The idea here is that we can have multiple Hand to Note installs, and each of them could potentially have a different HUD or different sets of custom stats. This really helps with allowing the software to run quickly. So rather than having 4 or 5 very large HUD packages installed in the same folder, we can actually break that up into individual folders. This is also very useful for things like installation recovery. Sometimes if something goes wrong, it could be necessary to completely install everything from scratch. This helps make that process a lot faster because you could, for example, have a backup installation of Hand to Note. Now, this is very unofficial. This is a trick that I used to use with Hand to Note 3. It's not in the documentation anywhere. It's not intended functionality of Hand to Note. It's just a hack that we figured out to make your life a lot easier. It was especially important with Hand to Note 3 because sometimes players would purchase a large HUD package like the Death Star, but they would also be interested in trying out a different HUD package as well. Both would get installed in the same directory. Guess what? Hand to Note 3 would just start crashing. And the end result is that a player would have to completely uninstall everything and go through the hassle of installing both HUD packages again, or install just one of them. And then if they wanted to switch to the other, they would have to uninstall everything, reinstall the second HUD package. So here at the Hand to Note site could of course look a bit different in the future, but the idea is simply to click the download button. And we're going to click save to save the Hand to Note 4 installer.exe to our hard drive. So we're here now in the downloaded directory and we're going to run the .exe. And generally this is going to work for you. You can just follow the installation process and normally it's going to install Hand to Note 4 in C drive program files, Hand to Note. But notice this, we get the error message, another version of this product is already installed. Installation of this version cannot continue. So I obviously have Hand to Note already installed on the system, but we can see straight away if you already have Hand to Note installed, you can't install a second version of Hand to Note. So we actually have to work around this in order to have multiple Hand to Note installs. So let's just pretend that you've done this and the installer has run and it's installed Hand to Note to C drive program files, Hand to Note. Now, generally, I think it will be called Hand to Note 4, just so it doesn't conflict with Hand to Note 3 installs. So it'll be inside a folder called Hand to Note 4. But notice I've gone ahead and renamed that folder to Hand to Note 4 Fresh Install. In other words, after installation, it probably appears inside the Hand to Note 4 folder like this. But the first thing that you want to do is actually rename that to Fresh Install. And the idea with the fresh install is that this is a fresh installation. You don't need to touch this at any point. You don't want to put any custom stats in here or any HUD packages. We just leave this as a fresh install. And anytime we want another instance of Hand to Note 4, we simply copy this, paste it, and rename it to whatever we want it to be called based on the functionality of that second install. Now on my C drive, I actually created another folder called DS3 program files. So we know that Hand to Note ordinarily gets installed inside program files. I created a new program files folder. It was called DS3, standing for Death Star 3 program files. And if you take a look inside this folder, I have all of these Hand to Note 4 folders and they all have slightly different functionality. So one is for testing something, one is for building something. You could have a different HUD package installed in each of these folders, for example. One of them might have a HUD package that's specific to PLO, one of them might have HUD package especially for Hold'em, etc. Now we have all of these different installations. The question is, how do we actually launch the different installations? Well, if I jump inside one of them, for example, let's go to Hand to Note 4 Builder Latest. This is actually for building the Death Star 3. So we could, for example, have one installation for building something, or we could have another installation for actually grinding because we don't necessarily want to mess around with the stats on the grinding setup we use, but at the same time we want to be able to build something. That could be a use case for 2 different installations. Now you'll notice that within each folder, within each Hand to Note 4 installation, there is a handtonote.exe file. This is of course the launcher. This is what's going to fire up Hand to Note. The idea is that depending on which .exe file you select, it's going to use all of the configuration from the immediate folder. So if I launch this handtonote.exe, it's going to use all of the custom stats within configuration here for this particular HUD. So I can double click handtonote.exe. I can choose yes. It's going to fire up handtonote 4. It's actually appeared on the other monitor right now, but it's loading up. But it's handtonote 4 for this specific configuration. Now I can't run two versions of handtonote 4 at the same time. You can still only run one at the same time. But if I close that, I can then simply select another installation of handtonote 4. And if I launch this handtonote.exe instead, it's going to load up this version of handtonote 4 with this specific configuration. If I decide that I want a fresh installation of handtonote 4, I can go back to that handtonote fresh install folder we created. I won't touch that one, but we can clone it, give it a new name. We can launch that one via the .exe, and then we can install our custom stats or HUD package into that particular version of handtonote. This really just ensures that we don't suffer from bloat where there are just too many custom stats, and just really ensures that whichever version of handtonote 4 you are using is going to run as smoothly as possible. We want each directory basically to have the absolute minimum number of stats in order to run as we want it to. And really, if you are still using handtonote 3, you can do exactly the same thing. Start with a fresh install, clone it, and then launch the .exe from within that individual folder. So this is what I used to do with handtonote 3 as well. If I open this folder and run this handtonote.exe, this is going to launch handtonote 3. As far as I'm aware, you also cannot run handtonote 3 at the same time as handtonote 4 because the process has the same name. So it's either handtonote 3 or handtonote 4. Okay, so summary here is download the exe installer, run the installer. That will create a new folder, probably in C drive program files. Rename that folder to something like handtonote 4 fresh installation. You never need to launch the exe from within that folder. It's just a backup which you can clone. So the first thing you're going to do is clone that folder, call it something else like handtonote 4 my HUD installation or handtonote 4 my HUD builder, depending on what you're using it for. Open that exe from within that folder, install your HUD packages on that particular instance of handtonote, and then you still have a fresh backup which you can reclone at any point. And you can create as many instances of a handtonote 4 install as you want. Now just keep in mind this is unofficial, so handtonote 4 are probably not going to tell you to do this. It's not going to be in the documentation anywhere. It's just something that we figured out that makes everything a bit easier and a bit more efficient.